The next big change in version 0.7.0 is background processing. Background processing allows your computer to do work on steps in the background while you continue to work on steps that require user input. So first, I'll show you that background processing is an optional feature that can be enabled here in the Splints panel or under User Preferences under the D3 tool panel and right here, Auto Background. Okay, if you want to use this by default, be sure and click Save User Settings. Notice that when I enable and disable Auto Background, that the workflow changes in the panel here. Okay, because this file is already saved, the background operations are visible here. But typically, if you haven't saved your file yet, you'll be required to save before moving on to the steps that enable background operations to occur. All right, the next thing you might notice is that there are more settings here in this panel, such as the shell thickness, the minimum thickness, the compensation gap, and the undercut amount. Because these functions are now going to happen in the background, you no longer have the opportunity to type in these values like you do when you're doing it in the manual workflow. So you have to pick these settings ahead of time, or at least before you finish the mark splint outline and the mark occlusal curves operations. So it's very important that you have your articulator values set after you do your mounting. It's also important that you have your shell thickness, minimum thickness setting, compensation gap, and undercut amount determined as well. So let's take a look at what this looks like. I'm going to go ahead and mark the outline, which I've done previously. Click Next, indicate the interior region. Click Next, verify that this was successful, and click Next again. Now, if we weren't using the automatic background processing, this operator would finish, and then we'd be required to click Mark Occlusal Curves. But because it's allowing us to do things to keep moving through the workflow, it automatically kicks you into the next operator. So while I'm marking these curves, keep your eye on the top of the screen here and also over here where the background operations are listed. You'll notice little checkboxes appearing as we keep doing our work. On a side note, we're able to calculate the full resolution rim now in the curve marking mode, as well as control the flare and all other parameters like we do in the normal function down here. So since the background has already calculated our shell for us, we can show the shell. And we can even go ahead and fuse the rim right here while we still have access to editing these curves. Right, so when we hit commit in this function, we're now already down to start working on other parts of the workflow, okay, with some of the most time-consuming tasks having already happened. The functional surface is being generated right now because that takes input from the curve marking. If you want to know more about this, click this info button and it will take you to the knowledge base article about background processing, particularly which background processes require which inputs to have been completed and what settings they pull from. So a little bit of an interesting chart here, but you'll see that the functional surface actually requires the occlusal curves to be finished, and that's why this functional surface didn't get started until we finished our occlusal curves.